Hello, this is us at Broadcasting Scotland and welcome to the Full Scottish. With us today, because Corri isn't very well, and we wish her very well, but with us today we have Philippa Whitford, MP, and Sandra White, MSP. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, we had an eventful week once again. I think we should start off by speaking about the International Women's Day and the unfortunate news that came to us on International Women's Day, which is that the baby of Shamima Begum has passed away. The child was 3 weeks old. Would you like to kick us off on this discussion, Sandra?
I think it's very, very sad. And I also think it's not just sad, but it's reprehensible what's happened, not giving her citizenship, not being able to bring her out from the refugee camp. Our British citizens, the baby was born a British citizen, and perhaps that baby would have survived if they'd been brought out. And one of the issues I'd like somebody to look at, I'm sure we'll get figures, maybe Philippa may know, I don't know, but in a gender balance, how many men have actually came out from these, not just refugee camps, but from prison, having been, ISIS. Just would be interesting to know in International Women's Days, we're talking about how many men have actually been repatriated back to Britain compared to women. But I think it's something that is reprehensible, as I said, that this young girl, and she was a girl, 15 years of age, thought perhaps, who knows what went through her mind, get married, etc., but to lose 3 children.
It seems...
And the last one being born, living for 3 weeks.
Yeah, an opportunity that the UK had. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
The Home Secretary decided that instead of giving a passport and making sure that these citizens can come back home, no passport was issued, and actually the citizenship was withdrawn, which is a whole new issue in itself and really needs to be discussed, I think, in a constitutional way. We're really facing a big moral dilemma when it comes to this.
I think it is particularly the moral aspect of this. I'm not saying that Shamima Begum should come home and have a free ride and all is forgiven and forgotten, but to abdicate responsibility and say that suddenly it's Bangladesh's responsibility for her, when she's never lived there, she has never held citizenship. Now, she would have the right to apply for citizenship before turning 21, and I wonder, is that what the Home Secretary describes as the legal basis for this? Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I had thought you had to have another citizenship rather than have the right to apply, and therefore she has been, at the moment, made stateless, and that is against international law. Now, about 400 fighters have apparently returned, depending on the crimes they're felt to have committed. Some obviously would face justice, and I have no difficulty with her coming back and facing prosecution if there's evidence against her. But others have gone through de-radicalisation programmes, mentoring, etc., to try and re-establish them. And, this business of removing citizenship has become more common. There appear to be over 100 cases in the last year, and probably the majority of them are men, so I don't know what the gender balance is, but we've heard of 2 more cases today that he's removed citizenship from 2 other girls who went as teenagers, who now have children as well, who would be British citizenship. And to me, this idea that you just wash your hands of these issues, when these young people were born and grew up in the UK, were radicalised and groomed in the UK.
And to a degree failed by the UK.
Exactly, it's a UK issue, and to just go, someone else can deal with it, I think is utterly immoral and, as you say, reprehensible. I'm not looking for a soft ride for anybody who has been, deluded enough to go and support ISIS. But it's a UK responsibility, and they should be taking that responsibility.
Absolutely. I think, especially when we are talking about her children, these children, regardless of where they were born and who their parents are completely innocent. We didn't have the opportunity to protect the 2 children that passed away before she was found in this refugee camp, but we had the opportunity to protect this 3-week-old baby. And the workers in the camp have said that they believe that the baby would not have passed away if it had been repatriated with its mother and taken into British state care.
I mean, that's always hard to know as a doctor. It's always easy to look back at a case and say it could have been different. But when she was first discovered by the journalist, she was expecting. So if she had been brought back at that point, if the child had been born here, even if he had run into difficulties very early on, there would of course be technology available that clearly wouldn't be available in the camp. And you have to question, when these three cases quite close together of women losing their citizenship have come up, you can't help but feel that it's because they were in the public eye. They were in the public eye when they left, and it was reporters in the refugee camps that found them. So to me, it just seems to be a response to publicity rather than anything based on principle or law or any thought through approach to how are we going to deal with British citizens who went to Syria to support ISIS.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to remember as well, we talk about the children that were lost, and as many thousands are lost. She wasn't British citizenship, she was a child herself.
Absolutely. Which 15-year-old hasn't made a mistake?
She was a child herself, and you've got to think about it. You've got to think of her family here, her dad, and they've apologised basically on her behalf. And as you said, Philippa, she could have been brought back once she was pregnant. We're not saying that perhaps not prosecuted, but at least spoken to, find out what was happening, de-radicalised. I find it a very worrying precedent that you can take anybody's citizenship from them.
Absolutely.
Because it could happen to anybody. It could happen to us, basically, if we don't put a stop to that and say it is illegal under international law. But we have to recognise if it happens to 1, 2 or 3, it can happen to anybody. And that is a worry.
It is, especially under the circumstances that we've just mentioned, that it's based on the fact that they say that she could claim potential citizenship of the state. By that definition, it's not just, you know, foreign nationals that might have gained British citizenship, but British citizens that might well have the opportunity to gain citizenship in another country, but will be made stateless in the meanwhile.
I mean, there's actually all sorts of ways in which British citizens are losing their rights over the last decade. One of the ones that, you know, I've had to deal with cases is British citizens who have worked or lived overseas, married someone outside the EU, have a family, have children, and want to come back. And because the salary thresholds are set and enforced, they would actually have to come here for a year or so to get a job that pays well enough, and particularly if you have children, that scale goes up, which means that they lose their right to family life for maybe a couple of years, or they simply can't come back. And my son has 2 friends who are in that situation, that they are married, they're settled, but they're simply not able to come back here with their wives. And to me that seems bizarre, that they do not have the right to exercise their British citizenship while keeping the basic human right, which is the right to a family life and to come back home if they so choose to do. I've no issue with challenging what are thought to be false marriages, but you know, I had a case and they'd been married for 10 years and had, you know, 2 or 3 children. That isn't a false marriage. And yet the difficulty of trying to help that gentleman come back, it was from Canada at the time, and bring his wife with him. That is in essence taking away the rights of British citizens who have no rights anywhere else. Yeah,
we had not as much a cross-party group, but we've held events in the Scottish Parliament to talk about that. We had an American lady, her husband was here, she was American, couldn't meet the threshold, and there's very few people in ordinary jobs in Scotland that earn £30,000. So that stops a lot of people. We had a lovely, lovely Russian, Afghanistan man married to a Russian lady. Now they were getting on in years, she was his carer, and we did fight the case and we did win. But that, on that person, is this elderly couple on their minds constantly all the time. And yet she was caring for him, she was saving the state money, but it was genuine. And to think that they had to go through all that. And Ellen, obviously, you know, the European situation for yourself, it must be a real worry on everybody's minds in regards to that. And, you know, people come to you every day. We've got lots in my Kelvin constituency. I think it's the highest amount in Scotland, actually, about 5,000 EU nationals, which we meet up with regularly, and they're really, really worried.
Well, if you look at the immigration bill and white paper as it's proposed, this 30,000 that you're talking about, which would be the threshold for future EU citizens, not for those like yourself, Ellen, who are already here. I mean, in Scotland, the average salary is about 26,000.
Yep.
And there is this obsession that Theresa May has with basically shutting down immigration. And in Scotland, we welcome people who come and settle here, whether from the EU or elsewhere, because they contribute not just to public services, but to our communities. And frankly, Scotland is 1/3 of the UK landmass. It's huge, and we need more people, and we know we need more people. So to me, the whole immigration issue going forward is existential for Scotland. And if it is all set by this xenophobic obsession in Westminster, it will utterly destroy Scotland and Scotland's economy. Our working age population is already falling again, and we can't afford that to be strangled.
Yeah, I think that is reflected in the way that the Scottish Government has been going about immigration issues, and we understand that it's not just a matter of kindness. I mean, it's good to have kindness, but there is real economic sense in preserving the diversity of the Scottish society, because it benefits all of us.
I was never prouder of our First Minister, though, than on the 24th of June 2016, when her very first speech was to EU citizens, like my German husband, who have worked here, who have contributed, and who are part of our community, saying, we want you to stay, and you are part of the fabric of our society. I thought it was a wonderful speech, and it was important to make it. And contrasting that with what we heard in Westminster, bargaining chips, playing cards, etc., right up until the last 6 months is the beginning of when Theresa May was talking about, oh yes, we'll let them stay, and then describing it as on the same basis. But the original settled status was going to be if you were outside the United Kingdom for more than 2 years, you would lose your settled status. Well, you might be, like my husband and I spent time in the Middle East as volunteers. You might be going to do a university course in Europe. Exactly. You know, and okay, that's been expanded to 5 years, but it's not the same as what people had, which was the absolute certainty that they had the right to be here.
You know, the real worry that I feel, and I think people in the streets feel as well, is the fact that you're going to become a small, insular, grey, depressing island. That's what it all pointing to, where you're not welcoming people, whereas we want to, because we don't have the powers of independence at the moment anyway, we're roped in with that. So you can see this small, grey, miserable wee island, insular looking. What future is that for my kids, your kids, grandkids? What future is that? And people need to realise that, to me anyway, that's what we're looking at, not looking forward to, very negatively, but that to me is the only thing that's there, being offered by Westminster. And you had mentioned xenophobic. This, although it was 2% of the Brexit throughout the UK, they're not thinking about anybody else. And the press, the media, and others really have to take responsibility for that. They're the ones that created Farage. They're the ones that, you know, the Labour and the Conservative Party took that mantle on to win votes over in Middle England. And look what they've created. They don't really want it, but look what they've created.
Well, nobody celebrated that freedom of movement works both ways. So our young people are losing a fabulous opportunity, you know, that we've all had to live, work, love and settle anywhere we wanted. And obviously in Parliament in Westminster, I raised Hans's backstory with his parents during the war, etc. That in one generation he couldn't believe that he could just live where he wanted. And now we're losing that. And I think freedom of movement was actually one of the greatest things that we got from Europe.
I mean, I remember Theresa May standing on stage and gloriously announcing that freedom of movement was about...
the end of it.
Absolutely. I've spent the last 2.5 years, of course, worried for myself and some of my friends who are EU nationals, but the reality of this is that the entirety of the UK population is about to lose rights that are integral to how we understand ourselves. It is about losing freedom, not just freedom of movement, but freedom to love, freedom to work, to learn, to go abroad, to feel free and to experience life in a way that is united in diversity and not divided by...
I mean, the biggest surprise, not surprise, but when you see it on the television when you had Boris Johnson and the others announcing the referendum result, they were not happy looking. They were absolutely shocked that they had actually won. You were like...
If it's Boris Johnson you're talking about, you're absolutely right. I mean, he hid until the following Wednesday, and what you could see in his face on the 24th was not just that he didn't expect to win, he didn't want to win. No. This was all about the succession to David Cameron of the Tory party, and they expected a narrow Remain vote which would have forced Cameron to step down, and he saw himself just stepping into that role.
I always remember
that.
They
had no plan. Speeches, right?
Yeah, they had no plan, they had no manifesto, they had no white paper, and and they shout that Europe should come up with a solution. Well, you say that you've believed in this, particularly the Farages of this world have believed in this for decades, and yet you'd never put a plan together.
Yeah. And how do they expect Europe and other countries in Europe to actually respect them when you saw some of the stuff that was in the media? With machine guns pointed at France and all. I mean, how do they expect these people to welcome them with open arms and change any laws? Because they've basically burnt their bridges.
Completely.
And unfortunately, we're on the prefaces of that.
Yes, and we've become, the world looks at the UK now and sees not only are they xenophobic, but also happy to violate previous made agreements, like when we talk about the Irish border, where on the backstop there's been going back and forth. There's also this whole, I think the world has looked at the UK in a very romanticised way, and that while there's nostalgia for the loss of this image of the UK, people are seeing very clearly how broken the Westminster system is, how broken democracy is at this point. So it's a very interesting time for Scotland to be taking democratic, moral and
I love how you said the image, because that is what it is.
It is.
An image. And they have worked so hard over 300, 400 years. But now you can see Westminster isn't democratic. You go down there, you know just how bad it is. Basically, I don't need to tell you that, basically. But if there's a place where you're taking, votes about people's lives and war, and there's not even enough seats for the MPs to get in, that tells you everything.
But if you talk to people, and obviously not just Brexit itself, which obviously was a shock to everyone, but how the fact that Scotland voted Remain has been completely ignored. The Scottish Government's compromise proposal was thrown out within about 8 weeks, and what we've seen is a complete undermining of both the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. This total disrespect for Scotland in the last 2.5 years has made people reconsider how they voted in 2014. And when I have spoken to people who were kind of very actively voting no, not just voting no, but maybe campaigning for no, and have changed their mind, the common phrase you hear is, I campaigned for the UK because I really believed in the United Kingdom, but that United Kingdom doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
And what you see is clearly no one considered the position of Northern Ireland before the referendum. Obviously, I'm from Belfast, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and the way that Ireland has been spoken to, some of the Brexiteers saying Ireland should also leave the EU, should rejoin the United Kingdom to make it easy for us to carry out Brexit. Literally Ireland and predominantly England, as it would have been at the time, have been at each other's throats for hundreds of years. And over the last 20 years, since the Good Friday Agreement, that relationship had blossomed and repaired, particularly after the visit of the Queen. Really, the relationship had never been closer. And actually that has been really undermined by a lot of the language that has been used.
Completely. If we look at Ireland and how it has the full support of the EU behind it, all the solidarity, if we look at the rest of the UK, yes, Wales and Scotland are democratically behind, but I look at Northern Ireland and see that there's a part of the UK which is democratically completely unrepresented and has been for well over a year now. And
it's 2 years now.
We're getting to the point where this part that is going to be most affected of the UK is actually democratically completely disenfranchised, and the fact that the representatives from Northern Ireland are the ones that are keeping the current government in power, it really grinds my gears.
Well, I think that's the thing, with you have Brexit, which threatens a border. You have a snap election, which unfortunately destroys the moderate parties on either side. So you're left with Sinn Féin at one end of the spectrum who don't take their seats, DUP at the other, and then you hand the whip hand over the government to the DUP. So you literally have these 10 fairly far-right, fairly extreme MPs who have complete control of the UK government and do not speak for Northern Ireland. And to listen to them standing up in the House saying they speak for all of Northern Ireland is really just absolutely bizarre. And the government in Westminster have literally not done enough to try and get the power sharing Parliament installment and government installment.
Well, no, it seems like they're direct beneficiaries of this power sharing agreement not being enforced. So I think this would be a good time to look into the next week and see where we're going with Brexit. I know, but it would be interesting to see. We know that the DUP has flipped and flopped their opinion about whether they want or want to not support Theresa May's deal. How do you anticipate the next week?
I think it's almost impossible to anticipate the next week. The way the numbers look at the moment still look like she would lose on Tuesday. Obviously, she is bribing, threatening, cajoling, doing everything she can to try and get it over the line. And of course, what she promised at the time of the Cooper-Letwin amendment was that we then would have the chance to vote against no deal on Wednesday in a formal vote. There was already support for the Dromey-Spellman amendment, but that doesn't force the government, so there'd be a formal vote and then a formal vote on Thursday regarding asking for an extension. There are rumours that she might pull the two of those votes if she loses by anything less than she lost the last time. There are definitely appear to be some within the European Research Group, the ERG, the kind of more extreme Brexiteers who are softening because they also can't predict where this is all going to go, and particularly if it got to a second referendum that they might lose Brexit altogether. So some of them are softening, some of them are hardening. So the arithmetic is actually quite difficult to do. But the rumours that she would maybe pull those two votes in the same way as she pulled the meaningful vote in December and kicked it into the long grass for 5 weeks. You know, I think there'll be an absolute riot in Parliament. But the rumour is already circulating that there might be meaningful vote 3, which could literally be a matter of days before Brexit Day. And clearly, you know, for her, it is using that threat of the 29th of March and running down the clock to kind of increase the pressure to get people to vote for what is basically a blind Brexit. You know, they keep talking about this as a deal. It's not. It's a withdrawal agreement. It is only 3 items. The cash we would owe to the EU, trying to give security to citizens and coming up with a plan for Northern Ireland. So in 2.5 years, they have managed to deal with 2 out of the 3 subjects and have spent the last year going round and round the same racetrack over the Irish border. What we have for the deal was 6 pages, which has now been expanded up to 26 pages of largely waffle. We will work together to create the best free trade deal possible. That kind of level. I'm interested in space because of Prestwick, and the space chapter with a little heading says, we will try to cooperate on space, end of chapter. That's the level it's at. So as I said the other day on Politics Live, it is literally, we are jumping off a cliff and hoping to knit a parachute on the way down. We have no idea.
Absolutely.
Would you be heading towards a Norway deal? Would you be heading towards a Canada deal? Are you heading towards a World Trade Organization deal? And so this is the problem. You are expecting people to back that when in actual fact what Brexit looks like is still utterly unclear.
Absolutely.
And, you know, a blind Brexit is almost the worst of all possible worlds. And it's certainly, with the Irish backstop in it, would be hugely detrimental to Scotland because Northern Ireland clearly will be virtually within the single market for goods, very close to the single market. And what you would have, a simple one, is fishing. Northern Ireland fishermen could catch fish in the west coast of Scotland, land it and sell it at 0 tariff, whereas if it was processed at all, filleted, smoked, whatever, you could end up with between 5 and 16% tariff on Scottish fish. That would completely destroy the west of Scotland fishing industry. So the idea that just vote for it, all it does is buy you 20 months of transition. It does not buy you a solution to Brexit.
Yeah. Right, and as far as we know, the British government isn't even ready to write the legislation needed for this exit until the end of this month. It doesn't seem prepared to be even doing that. I mean, if we look in the context of university, imagine a student handing in 26 pages after 2.5 years. Unlikely they would be awarded any grade. This is a failure on so many levels.
Well, they didn't get into the discussing the future. They were almost ready to sign a withdrawal agreement in December 17. When obviously the phone call from Arlene Foster came, and the entire of the last year has been just going round and round and round in circles regarding the issues of Northern Ireland. So they never got into
as you were saying about Northern Ireland, it's not just the DUP, Wales, Scotland. We have debated it on numerous occasions in the Parliament. Everyone apart from the Tories has agreed with us. There shouldn't be a hard Brexit, etc., etc. But that never gets taken on board. They're not listening to anybody in regards to it. And my big worry, I'm on the Health Committee in the Scottish Parliament, we're given SIs constantly all the time, blood products, chlorinated chicken. That is a real worry to me. It should be a worry to everybody that they expect us just to sign this off. I mean, at one point they gave us 5 days. 5 days to sign it off. And we said, no, we want to investigate this.
Well, obviously, I have spoken a lot, both in Parliament and in public meetings about the health impacts of Brexit.
Very
Everyone's conscious about, trade and customs. And there are many people walking around thinking, well, it won't affect me, I don't run a business, or my business doesn't import and export. But in actual fact, the health impacts are major.
Absolutely.
We did a big piece of delegated legislation on Wednesday, which was about the leaving the European Medicines Agency.
Yes.
Now, we were given in total, because there were 2 pieces of delegated legislation, approximately 200 pages each, and then another 100 pages of notes and impact assessment. And we got that towards the end of the week before. So we had less than a week to go through it. And the impacts of it and the cost of it is enormous.
Absolutely.
And this is just being rammed through. And of course the one I raised about the serious shortage protocol, where they used what's called the negative resolution, where they just put it in the library, and if nobody finds out about it and kind of raises objections, in 40 days it's law.
I think they thought that was going to happen to us, you see, and they didn't even take cognizance of the recess dates for the Parliament, the school holidays or anything like that. So as I said, we were given 7 days to sign off these, and we just refused.
Shall we talk about the news that has just come in?
Sorry.
The Scotsman's just reported on Twitter that the SNP will launch a Commons move this week to hold a second referendum on Scottish independence if Brexit goes ahead. How do we feel about that?
I'm quite pleased about it, actually.
Well, I have to say that, I think we should be seeking independence regardless of whether Brexit goes ahead or not. Because what you've seen over the last 2.5 years is Scotland just being dragged behind, like, some child's unloved blanket through the mud with no control, no autonomy whatsoever. And whether at the end you literally stop at the cliff edge and it doesn't happen, I'm sorry, the utter disrespect, the threat, the 24 powers being re-reserved, including all sorts of key devolved areas, farming, fishing, food standards, food labelling, food safety. It's so obvious that they are about selling Scotland out to an American trade deal. And one of the ones that concerns me, which is public procurement. So suddenly the UK government would have the power to say all public services have to put all contracts out to tender. That's what they did to their own NHS through the Health and Social Care Act, and now they would have the power to do that right across the UK. So I don't think they'll shut the Scottish Parliament, but I think what you've seen, the whole change, the expansion of the Scotland office, which now calls itself the UK government in Scotland, I think there is a threat of hollowing out the Scottish Parliament, which has protected us from so many
especially if
Tory policies.
Completely, if we consider how the Scottish Parliament came about, and that it had a lot to do with the EU legislation coming in, and through that having to devolve powers to regional governments.
I mean, although you say this is, sensational news, Scotsman, etc., I think we've got to remember that the Scottish Parliament took a legally binding vote which says if Brexit is detrimental to Scotland, we will have a second independence referendum. Now that's there, it's enshrined in the legislation,
absolutely,
in the Scottish Parliament. So and we know it's detrimental, we have a duty in the Scottish Parliament, not just a duty, it's there in legislation, to go for it. So whilst it might be, you know, headline news, all of a sudden it's there, it's been there all along.
Yes.
I think that's the importance of...
It's an important part of it.
You know, it's very difficult to decide the timing of such an independence referendum, but to my mind, it has to be early enough that people are being given a choice between the upheaval and chaos of Brexit or the upheaval of independence. And the difference is, if you choose Brexit or you choose to just stay there, you're stuck in the boot of Theresa May's car, being taken wherever she wants to take you, with no voice at all. With independence, we would be in the driver's seat. We would never have held this referendum. We certainly wouldn't be doing Brexit. And if Scotland becomes independent, as I hope and feel it needs to in the next few years, obviously we would be seeking to be back in Europe. Because I think people in Scotland, or certainly most people in Scotland, do consider themselves also as European citizens. And I think that it's important that we have that opportunity.
Well, I think Brexit's brought it to a head. Simple things like going through airport checkouts. I mean, you have these horrible big signs, here, there. Loads of queues, might be simple, but it affects people.
It does.
But I try to go back and forward, even a passport, all of these wee things.
But even not people. Just holiday, actually in
your
daily life, you know, EU citizens like Ellen make up a significant proportion of our health services and even more of our social care services. And the further north you go in Scotland, actually that proportion gets bigger, because people, particularly from Germany and Holland, love the mountains and the fjords and the islands, as my husband did. We lived in Mull for a year. So to lose them, and I don't mean to lose the people who are here now, but if we can't recruit in the future, there's been a 90% drop in European nurses coming to the UK. And in England, they have over 40,000 nursing vacancies.
One of the statistics.
So that's going to affect, that will affect people every day, not just going on holiday.
No, I'm just saying people
day.
who might not necessarily think about an independent Scotland, some of these wee things does affect them. But the fact of the matter that we're losing all these workers, we did an inquiry in the Health Committee, and all the evidence we got from the experts was absolutely, it's going to crash.
Yeah, and it's not only people not coming into Scotland after Brexit. From my own experience, and probably your experiences as well, there's enough people ready to leave the country and already leaving the country because they do not wish to live in an environment like this.
Well, the BMA and GMC did a survey back in 2017, I think it was, and it showed between a third and a half of EU doctors were thinking about leaving, and 19% from England and 14% from Scotland were already in the process, as in had applied for jobs, had their houses up for sale, and were actually leaving.
And we can't, I mean, all you get from the Brexiteers or the Westminster government is we will train consultants. I mean, you can't train a consultant in a year or 6 months,
no,
as you know full well, Philippa. So, but it's just, it's unbelievable to think that they actually can comprehend that this is going to work, Brexit. It's not.
Absolutely.
But I think it's that disrespect. So the ignoring the lack of legislative consent motion from the Scottish Parliament for the Withdrawal Act, taking the Scottish Government to the Supreme Court. I mean, after 20 years of the Scottish Parliament, the disrespect that has been there in the last 2.5 years should make people think, really, is this what you want? That Scotland just gets dragged about.
I think
that leads me on really nicely. This week at the Prime Minister's questions, Theresa May stated that Scotland had no mandate to hold another independence referendum. For us at Broadcasting Scotland, this week also has been a very interesting one. On the 24th of February, we were in Aberdeen with the Aberdeen and Angus Independence Group at their conference, and Keith Brown was speaking there. So Broadcasting Scotland decided to record this, and this clip that we're about to play you was then, let's say, reappropriated by people who hadn't sought the permission, including the Tory party. Let's have a look at the clip.
One of the things that's very important is what happens on a Section 30 order. So now I have said, and I think Gillian may have been at the agreement when I've said it, I don't think that certainly the SNP and I don't think the Yes Movement should be willing to anticipate a refusal of a Section 30 order as a reason not to call a referendum. If we want to have a referendum, then we decide we're going to have a referendum.
So this clip was then presented as a surreptitious recording that leaked the deputy's opinions, and that it was presented to be something that was not official party line. In fact, it got so far that it was brought up in FMQs right again, and that was Jackson Callow. We'll have a look at that clip too.
Week. Worse still, today we read in the papers that the First Minister's deputy is also plotting another referendum on independence, no matter whether it's legal or not. Another independence referendum is the last thing Scotland needs. So irrespective of the views of her errant deputy, will the First Minister rule out this divisive plan?
First Minister.
The legal basis for the next independence referendum should be the same as the basis for the last independence referendum. And the only reason we are talking about this issue is the disgracefully anti-democratic stance of the Conservatives, who refuse to recognise a mandate won at not just one election but 2 elections and endorsed by this Parliament.
So that's where we're at with that.
Yes.
It's obviously very carefully worded statements that we're hearing from all people involved. It leaves the question open what the path for Scotland is to keep going, but in any case I think you'll agree that Scotland continues, well, the Scottish Government continues to hold a mandate to hold an independence referendum, and that has been made clear in several instances. So, moving forward from here with the news that we've just gotten in from the Scotsman, I think it's going to be an extremely fascinating week for us, both regarding Brexit and when it comes to independence.
Absolutely. And I think we also have to remember the will of the Scottish people. That is very important, and we shouldn't forget that it's all about legislation, it's about Section 30. You speak to people out in the streets, grassroots, SNP, whoever it may be, and they actually don't particularly like being told, well, actually, you have to go to us cap in hand, phrase. You have to come to us in Westminster cap in hand, and we'll say no. And that is all Jeremy Hunt and others have said in the last couple of weeks, and that doesn't resonate well with the Scottish people. So let them continue telling folk they've got to put their begging bowl out, because it doesn't work. It works the opposite way.
Can you imagine if Europe had said to the UK, no, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to have a referendum on leaving the EU?
Yeah.
There's a complete irony bypass in Westminster. Yeah. You know, the Prime Minister, it's not that long ago when she said a country cannot be held in a union it doesn't want to be part of. You can't force a relationship. You know, if you were to think about it as a couple, you know, the whole you would never make it on your own. You know, I won't allow you to leave the house. I won't allow you to get a divorce, etc. All of these things would seem quite shocking to us, and yet that's very much how Scotland is being treated. The thing about a Section 30 is it makes it a legally binding referendum. And obviously to not have a whole big long court procedure because of it, obviously that's the ideal, and that's absolutely the policy of the First Minister. The getting that, actually the thing that would make the biggest difference to us achieving that is people actually out campaigning about independence now, having conversations with people who voted no but are upset about Brexit and upset at how Scotland has been treated throughout this Brexit process, and indeed being told, shut up, put your hand over your mouth, be quiet in the boot, because we don't want to hear anything from you. And the reason that this approach is being taken by the Conservatives is they are terrified of another independence referendum, because they know that if a campaign was moving, the chances are that the next time we would win and more people would move. They used Project Fear the last time. And indeed they used Project Fear during the European election because they thought it worked. But Better Together started at 67% support and ended up at 55. That isn't a campaign that worked. That's a campaign that hung on by the skin of its teeth. And so they know that the lies they told, you know, if we're independent, you lose your state pension. The promises they made, Scotland will be an equal partner in this union. Look how we've been treated over Brexit. So the thing is, a lot of what they said in 2014 would haunt them, and they have very little that they would be able to attack. Scotland needs to be in charge of its
absolutely,
own future.
but one of the interesting points that's been raised on numerous occasions, it's quite topical, it is very topical, particularly for Catalonia, is the fact that if we don't go through the Section 30, the legal part, are we emulating what's happening in Catalonia just now? That's been raised with me, it's obviously been raised with yourself, Nicola, and others too, basically, and it's how you it's how you promote that, it's how you do explain that and promote that, because having been over in Catalonia at the referendum and being an international observer, absolutely fantastically run, but basically what's happening in Catalonia now is fascism, not democracy. But we were told that they were copying what was happening in Scotland. And of course, Spain came down heavy. I'm very sorry to say the EU has not protected or stood up for the Catalonian people. And that is a worry, that is a real worry. So I just wondered how
I believe
that
it's a worry.
go, you know?
You're right, but I think there's an opportunity in the fact that Brexit has shown the face of the UK. The EU up until now was obliged to act in the interest of its official member states, and yes, while they represent the citizens of the EU, a country that is leaving the European Union is doing so while kicking everybody in the backside that comes from Europe or is married to anybody connected to Europe, and the fact that there's a genuine desire and a closeness between Scotland and Europe means that there's a set of circumstances that has really turned around, and there's an opportunity for Europe to finally make a affirmative choice.
First Minister going, to Paris and North America even.
Absolutely, we've seen that all over the place.
Because you're putting your marker out.
I think the other thing is obviously what Spain utilised was this very bizarre Francoist constitution that they have that makes campaigning for independence illegal. That is not the case in the UK. There isn't a written constitution, and there is absolutely nothing against you campaigning peacefully and supporting independence. So that is one of the differences. What you say about the EU being, if you like, a group of member states absolutely holds, and I think the EU were like a rabbit in headlights regarding Catalonia because it was to interfere in a member state, but equally to disapprove of the violence that happened. And I felt at the very least they should have disapproved of the violence.
And many did privately, but not in their official capacity.
They should have done it. Certainly my German family in 2014 just didn't get the whole thing, because as you say, this image of the UK as multicultural, inclusive, pragmatic, lovely. Why would you want to split that up? And particularly in Germany, where obviously it was in 1990 that they actually managed to unify. So they just didn't get it. But across Central Europe, when people saw that map the morning after the Brexit, with Scotland all in yellow for Remain, as opposed to the predominance of blue in England and Wales, suddenly they got it. Actually, you're a different country. And the thing is, historically, Scotland's had links to Europe. Literally for 700-800 years, both from trading in the Hanseatic League to the old alliance with France, whereas England was more self-sufficient because it was bigger, but equally its interactions with Europe in the medieval period were much more about being at war with France, at war with Spain, at war with both, whereas that was not Scotland's experience. And I think the whole thing is that if we are able to gradually build the support for independence and for a referendum so that people have that choice, it will become harder for Theresa May to say no. Scotland is coming to a fork in the road. The last time there were people who clung to the status quo, that's easy, let's just keep it how it is. And as I often say, it was like a big straight motorway with bright lights, smooth surface. Independence was a kind of country road with a lot of trees. I'm not so sure. I'm just going to stay with this. We are now coming literally to a fork. So either you're going down the Brexit, as you say, insular, isolationist Britain, or you get into the driving seat and you start to make your own path. And that is to be outward looking and international, but also to have control of policies that we've seen in the last 9 years undermining and destroying Scotland's potential, from renewable energy to looking after our more vulnerable citizens.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are having policies enforced in Scotland that we utterly don't support. Yeah. And I think you will gradually see a shift. But we all need to be out there talking to people.
Completely. And I think we see that Brexit was a much more unifying topic in Scotland than it was in the rest of the UK, but also more unifying than the independence debate. There's a lot of no voters, former no voters, who are much more attached to Europe than they were to the thought of, you know, having an independent Scotland. So this is something that is really, for them, the status quo does not exist anymore. Their status quo has changed, and this is why it's now the time to get out.
But it's equally, no one was able to put forward what are the real positives of the United Kingdom. And staying in it, and that's why it was Project Fear.
Yeah.
The only way, and of course, you know, this has all come out since then, the only way to win is to intimidate and frighten people. Whereas in actual fact, when I was campaigning regarding Europe, my articles around health were all about the benefits that we've had. Even what Alan Smith and Bob Doris are talking about, the European Reference Network of 900 units in over 300 specialist hospitals on rare diseases that allow, you know, a specialist here to get advice from somewhere else in Europe for people who are suffering from something that is so rare. You're not going to have any specialist in one place.
Well, and this is a very this is a very specific area. But even things like Eurostat, to which we won't have access anymore. How is Scotland going to know what decision it needs to make, and how to compare itself to countries if there's no alignment between the way that we collect and gather data and share it with each other?
Well, it's that key factor of collaboration. You know, the UK government says we'll replace the funding of Horizon 2020. We'll do this. We'll have an industrial strategy. But sitting in a muddy field by yourself with all the money you want is still not collaboration. And we are
sitting in a muddy
field. The power of Europe.
Not just because of the weather, but because of the fact they've announced this money for regions in England, but nothing for Scotland.
Oh, the buying off of certain Labour MPs.
Actually, that leads me on really nicely to the Labour conference. We have heard lots of interesting suggestions this week from the Labour conference, which was, I think, sparsely attended. Yeah, some of the suggestions were leaning towards federalism once again, and there could be no clearer sign that we're heading for an independence referendum once again.
Absolutely.
The biggest thing that came out of that was when they talked about the federalism, I discovered that Partick in my constituency has a baroness of Partick. Nobody knew anything about this, and I obviously put it out on Twitter because I think the House of Commons, as we said as well, should be complete. Not the House of Commons, House of Lords should be completely abolished. House of Commons as well, by the way, for us in Scotland anyway. And
okay, we won't abolish it, we'll just leave.
We can leave. Well, they can abolish it themselves. But nobody knows anything about this Baroness of Partick, who's the person that's been tasked with the job of writing this paper. She's already written books about Keir Hardie, I believe. Nobody knows anything about her. Nobody even knew we had a Baroness in Partick.
But we've been round this track with Labour before. They dig up the federal offer, as you say, every time there is a threat of independence. But unless you were having parliaments all over England, if England is 85% of the population, it changes absolutely nothing. Exactly as we're seeing with Brexit. You know, we were told we were a family of 4 nations. 2 nations voted leave, 2 nations voted remain. So that should have been, right, okay, we're not doing it.
Absolutely.
But no, it's kind of, if England chooses this, everyone else has to go along with it. And that wouldn't be changed by federalism as it stands.
No,
and frankly, that would have been an offer, you know, in the late 90s or the early 2000s. People see that, you know, that would still involve leaving foreign affairs at Westminster, leaving defence at Westminster, leaving macroeconomics at Westminster. And it's these decisions, parking Trident 30 miles up the road from here, dragging us into an illegal war in Iraq, which started the whole kind of bonfire of the Middle East. Were things we had no influence of. And we're seeing it again now that the Scottish Government is insufficiently involved in the direction of Brexit. Theresa May started out saying, I will consult across the House and I will consult across the United Kingdom and create what is Brexit to look like, and then I'll go to Europe. She didn't. And she's only consulting anybody now because she's desperate.
I think it's a telling thing, the federalism, as you said, and everybody knows, they just reiterate it, roll it back out again to try and catch people out, or to think they'll get people who are going to vote for independence, maybe we'll go for federalism. It shows that they're on their very last legs.
And it's a very poor strategy as far as I'm concerned. It's already failed, and you know, if we remember the vow was just, you know, it's been debunked from here to...
Yes.
It's
and
just
obviously Murray Foote, who was kind of one of the authors of it, the editor of the Daily Record, now says he would support
Absolutely. I was actually at the talk that he gave, his first talk in the south side of Glasgow after he came out as a now independent supporter, and it was very interesting to see what he had to say about this. In any case, the vow at this point is something that's long behind us, and we understand, and I think Scotland has seen that something that is printed on a piece of paper and is presented as something that is meant to hold the government accountable.
I mean,
it's just not
the
going
Labour
to
Party at their conference have said that they'll give Scotland certain powers. Or we'll give Scotland certain powers. We could have had those powers for the Smith Commission. It was the Labour Party that blocked them. So people need to be aware of the fact that, and hopefully they've read enough and they've seen enough in the past 4 or 5 years, that they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
I mean, it was Labour, specifically Labour, that voted against virtually every power that the Smith Commission would have given Scotland. And the thing is, why would you take bits of powers? I mean, the Scottish Government gets attacked over how long it's taking to set up the Scottish parts of social security. But that's because it has to interact with the DWP. In Scotland, we're increasing carers allowance, but at the moment, that would be given with the right hand from Scotland and taken away through universal credit. So in actual fact, trying to do something with an elephant on your back is much harder. If you have a blank sheet of paper, you're able to say, right, what is a common sense approach to this? And you could actually do it much quicker. So to give us bits of powers, I mean, to pay respect to Donald Dewar, he devolved or fought for devolution of whole departments, health, education, so that we could do something different. When you just have little snippets, it's actually really difficult to make a difference.
Let's have a little final discussion on a very Scottish issue. Let's talk about the Glasgow School of Art.
Oh, the Glasgow School of Art.
The current recommendation from the Scottish Government.
Well, sorry, Ellen.
No, you're the MSP.
Well, yeah, obviously the committee have done a fantastic job, and I do thank Joan McAlpine, the chair, and the rest of the committee for allowing me to be able to sit in and ask questions, etc., etc. I think the report that they put out is 100% accurate. My big worry is that the Glasgow School of Art, the board, and perhaps some of the others, not that they've turned a blind eye or a deaf ear, but they only hear what they want to hear in that respect. 2 major fires, it's criminal that this happened. We're going to be having to wait to July now to get the final report from the fire investigation, which is an awfully long time, but maybe they're looking into certain things. But the one thing that I will say is I've tried to meet with the board of Glasgow School of Art, tried desperately hard. I met with Tom Innes. That was the only time I was granted a meeting. Tom Innes has resigned, he's not there anymore. I tried to meet with them again 2 weeks ago. I was told to give them dates. I did give them dates. They've came back and said, no, they're not suitable. So the communication with the Glasgow School of Art, myself as a local member, and the community has been absolutely abysmal.
Absolutely, especially in the immediate aftermath of the second fire, absolute shutdown of media communications.
And then to tell people who have been suffering, and still some of them can't get about their business properly or anything like that, they're actually closing the road up at Garnet Hill area starting on Monday for other work to go on, to turn around and say, well, you know, it'll raise from the ashes, it'll be a phoenix, it'll take another 10 years. I really think that the Glasgow School of Art should be compensating the people who are suffering just now.
Absolutely.
Glasgow City Council, the government, we have put money in to businesses and local people, but these folk up here have become forgotten about.
I don't know if you remember, but last year I did this art project following the second fire, and it was about phoenixes. This was filmed by the One Show, the BBC. And I was very interested to see that as the artist and initiator of this public art project, the only opinion allowed within that project, well, within the film, was actually the one of the participants saying that she wishes for it to be rebuilt. The majority of people participating in this art project were not of that opinion, including me, being a former student of GSA and knowing that it's the second least happy second least happy
student
population in Scotland. I can understand why the facilities are not up to scratch for what they need to be doing, and obviously the constant interruptions, both with the construction of the Reed building as well as the constant fires, have really interfered with the student life and their ability to properly go about their work. So I can see why this is such a contentious issue, and it's specifically upsetting that it's going to take so long.
They were told before the 2014 fire that sprinklers should be there, and I'm not saying they refused, they just ignored, to the extent where the insurance company they had at that time says we cannot cover your insurance anymore, and they pulled out and they had to get another insurance company. So the bells were ringing constantly.
It's complacency.
But to get to the crux of, and hopefully we'll find out once the report is there, because there's so many rumours going about with the people that live up there. Some people say it didn't start in the art school. They say it started on the roof of the other one, the GCA one, the ABC. Some people say it started on the roof of that because that backs onto the art school. Some people say the alarm didn't go off because they live there and it didn't hear it. So to get this sorted out, we definitely need this inquiry. Unfortunately, it's in July, but we need a public inquiry.
If we're looking at going forward, I think the public inquiry will be looking retrospectively about what happened, but going forward, we need to consider what the real purpose of a school is, and it must be to look after students. If you're not looking after students and not catering to their needs, to the subjects that they're being taught, then the school by default is failing. The building, as it is now, is obviously devastating to look at, but this is not where the focus for GSA should be at this point. Their duty to their student body and their institution, to the memory of this building, is to provide proper services for the students that are able to.
I can understand the emotional attachment. I did 2 years at the GSA when I was a medical student at night, doing advanced drawing and then painting, and then went back when I was a cancer researcher at Glasgow University and did portrait painting. And in the 2014 fire, I remember it coming on the radio when I was driving, and I just burst into tears. So if anyone who admires Mackintosh or has visited it or studied at it, the emotional attachment is immense. The problem is the second fire was so utterly devastating. The question is exactly what is it we are restoring, and what is it you're actually completely rebuilding?
And who will be the owner?
And I think obviously issues of responsibility going forward are very important. But I'm not involved. Obviously, I'm not in Holyrood in the legal and technical side of it. But having studied there and having had a great experience in it, and being a fan of Mackintosh, I found it.
It is so sad.
Absolutely.
For history, for Scotland, for architecture.
For it to have happened once, and it to have been clear that sprinklers and the lack of sprinklers was a contributor, and then for it to happen again, literally 4 years later, is
frankly weeks before it was reopened.
Negligent.
They were nearly finished, and we were talking about putting the sprinklers in.
They should have been. Whether it was a temporary system or
they
whatever.
can use temporary systems, but
so, ladies, it's been a lovely hour.
It's been really nice.
It's gone really quickly.
Enjoying it,
We've had a good blather.
It has. We're looking forward to the next week and see how that goes down.
Well, you might be looking forward to it. I can't say I'm looking forward to it.
I can't say I've been looking forward to anything since Brexit, but we'll see where that goes. Thank you for joining us at Broadcasting Scotland. This was the Full Scottish. If you want to come and support us, please do so. We have an ability to subscribe to us for as little as £5 a month, and we're looking forward to see you again on Sunday.